This happened when I was really young, probably in second or third grade. Memories from that far back are fuzzy, but this one sticks out for reasons that'll soon be clear. It was a school day, and the rain had been pouring relentlessly all day. After picking me up from school, my parents headed out for some fancy event. I can't recall if it was a charity gala, a formal dinner, or something else entirely. They were supposed to return home that evening. But while they were away, the storm intensified, making it too dangerous to drive far. So instead of coming back, they decided to stay overnight at a friend's place closer to the event. I remember them calling me on the landline, apologizing over and over for leaving me alone. I told them I wasn't hungry and would be fine, but my mom gave me a list of tasks to complete before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, leave a light on, close the blinds, standard precautions. Back then, I didn't get why they were so worried. I was too young to understand that leaving a kid my age alone wasn't ideal. Honestly, I was kind of thrilled to have the house to myself. It meant endless candy and no bedtime. We didn't have a TV in my room, so I parked myself on the living room couch watching shows. I figured I'd do my mom's list right before bed since I planned to stay up all night anyway. At some point, though, the sugar high wore off, and I dozed off. No shock there. I don't know exactly when I woke up, but it was late enough for the TV to have switched to standby mode, probably at least 3 hours later. When I woke, I noticed it was much colder. Not unusual, since nights cooled down, but the chill was sharp enough for me to notice, even as a kid. I thought about curling up and sleeping again, but then I remembered my mom's instructions. I knew she'd figure out if I skipped them, and I didn't want to get in trouble after being trusted to stay home alone. So I dragged myself off the couch to check the doors and windows. I went through the list, locked the front and back doors, shut the blinds, checked the windows, even left a light on. Everything was secure, which puzzled me because the house still felt unnaturally cold. I pressed my hand against a few windows to check for drafts, but they were all tightly closed. I figured the storm might have messed with the heater and didn't dwell on it. I was too tired to overthink it. So, I trudged upstairs to my room, ready to crash. When I got there, I realized how fierce the storm had become. The living room, nestled in the house's center, had muffled the noise, but my bedroom had a large window facing outside, so I could hear everything. Rain battered the glass like it was trying to break through, and every few minutes, lightning flashed, followed by thunder that shook the walls. I wasn't scared of storms, but I did worry a tree might crash into the house. That's probably why I couldn't fall back asleep, even though I was exhausted. As I lay there, struggling to drift off, I started hearing strange noises. Every now and then, there was this odd creaking, like wood shifting. Our whole upstairs was carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, I thought it was a tree in the wind, but the sound wasn't quite right. Even as a kid, I knew what storms sounded like, and this wasn't it. The noise started to grate on me. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake, it was that weird creaking. Fed up, I sat up and scanned the room, not sure what I was looking for. I strained to hear over the storm, focusing on the sound. A flash of lightning lit up the room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes locked onto the only wooden thing in there, my closet. Darkness returned, and I froze. Another flash came a minute later, briefly illuminating the room. In that moment, I saw something that stopped my breath. The closet door was slightly open. I was certain it had been closed before. Something had moved it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream or make a sound. I didn't even think. I just slipped out of bed as quietly as possible and crept out of the room. That short walk to the door felt like an endless, terrifying journey. I hurried downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Only then did I let myself cry. I didn't know what to do. Someone was in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help. I don't know how long I stayed under that table, but at some point I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing any noise could be deadly. The footsteps weren't normal. It sounded like something was bouncing or stumbling down the stairs. They got closer, heading toward the dining room table like they knew where I was. I was certain I was going to die. Then from under the table I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but two bare feet came into view. Two filthy, wet, muddy legs, tinged an eerie yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female. The legs were covered in cuts, like they'd been scraped through brambles. I couldn't tell if they were male or female. The legs were covered in cuts, like they'd been scraped through brambles, and they wobbled, barely able to stand. Then they dropped something. A wrench. It clanged against the floor, and I had to fight every instinct to not scream. If they bent down to pick it up, they'd see me. I watched, eyes wide, as they stood there, not moving to grab the wrench or walk away. It felt like a tense standoff where any mistake could cost me my life. Finally, they shuffled off, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the erratic footsteps stumbled around the first floor for what felt like forever. Then, the front door opened and closed. They were gone. I stayed under that table for a long time afterward, paralyzed by fear and shock. I was old enough to grasp how dangerous it was, but too young to know how to cope. The rest of the night is a blur. I grabbed the wrench off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it in the morning. After double-checking the front door was locked, I crept back upstairs, climbed into bed, and somehow fell asleep. Life went back to normal after that. For some reason, I was too scared to tell my parents. I didn't want them to know I'd ignored their instructions, so I kept it to myself. It wasn't until years later that I told them, and it took some effort to convince them it was true. Looking back, not telling them right away was a terrible choice, since nothing could be done about it so long after. To be honest, that night haunted me for the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight for years and developed a fear of the dark that lingered. I still struggle to explain what happened, but I learned my lesson. Always lock your doors at night. I'm an only child, living with my parents in a house that's a bit too big for just 3 people. My parents always joke that they didn't plan to have just one kid. It just happened that way. Anyway, I was 15 when this next incident occurred. It was a rainy Saturday night in May, one of the last weekends before summer break. I have some medical issues that complicate things. I get panic attacks, faint easily, and sometimes struggle to breathe. I also need absolute silence to sleep. Even a faint hum keeps me awake. I've learned to manage, but sleepovers and trips are tough. People say rain helps them sleep, but for me, it's the opposite. It doesn't rain much where I live, but when it does, the noise keeps me up all night. That night, it wasn't a full-blown thunderstorm, but the rain was heavy enough to keep me awake. No matter what I tried, the sound of raindrops on the roof was too much. It was well past midnight when I gave up on sleep. I decided to burn off some energy. Eventually, I settled on taking a walk in the rain. It wasn't the first time I'd done this. My parents actually encouraged it when I couldn't sleep. We live in a safe neighborhood with a big, well-lit park next to our house, so walking late at night never felt risky. I threw on a raincoat, slipped downstairs quietly, and stepped outside without an umbrella. I left my phone behind, knowing the screen would only keep me awake. It was oddly calming outside. I love nature, and watching the trees sway in the wind, rain streaming down their branches, was exactly what I needed. After about 20 minutes, I started feeling tired, a good sign. I turned back toward home, hoping I'd finally sleep. As I cut through the park, I glanced at the road and saw something odd. A long, dark shape was lying in the middle of the street. At first, I thought it was a trash bag, but as I looked closer, I realized it was a person, face down. My stomach churned. The only explanation was that they'd been hit by a car and were hurt, or worse. There was no other reason someone would be lying in the street during a downpour. My instincts told me to keep walking, but my parents raised me to help those in need. So, against my better judgment, I approached. As I got closer, I could make out their clothes, black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Not exactly rain-appropriate attire. It looked like a man, which I'd assumed. For some reason, I suddenly felt how cold I was, like the rain had turned icy in an instant. As I neared the road, a piercing screech came from behind me. My heart raced, and I spun around, adrenaline surging. It sounded like a wounded animal's cry, but off somehow. I scanned the trees but saw nothing. The noise must have come from deeper in the park, so I figured I was safe. Still, the strangeness of it spiked my fear. I'd never heard anything like it, and the lack of explanation was terrifying. The sound of rain kept me grounded. Before I could react, they stood and sprinted toward me, a twisted grin on their face, holding what looked like a kitchen knife. I'd never truly feared for my life until that moment. Snapped out of it and ran, hearing them scream, "I'll kill you!" The wet grass slowed me down, but it would misshaped their steps, too. I didn't want to lead them to my house, so I bolted toward the park's trees, hoping to lose them. I didn't look back, just ran for my life, knowing they looked unhinged enough to follow through on their threat. I darted into the densest part of the park to hide. I didn't know if they were still chasing me, but I kept going, terrified that stopping would let the fear overwhelm me. Exhausted, I ducked behind a tree to catch my breath. I looked back. No one was there, or at least I couldn't see them. My only thought was how to get home safely. I stayed put for about 20 minutes before moving. I took a long route home, circling the park and emerging a few streets away. No one followed. I got home, collapsed on my bed, soaked and shaken. I never got answers about that night. The screech bothers me most. It's hard to believe it was connected to the man, but the timing feels too close. I think he heard it, saw me, and acted on some deranged impulse. Maybe drugs were involved. I don't know. It's the only explanation I can muster. I still live in that house, and even years later, I think about that night sometimes. I'm 29 now, and one of the only things that truly clears my mind is camping. Real, remote, middle-of-nowhere camping. I grew up in Northern California and have spent much of my adult life finding those isolated spots where you feel like the last person on Earth. This next story happened a few months ago. I'd just gone through a rough breakup and needed solitude. So I packed my truck and drove to a quiet riverside spot I'd found before. It wasn't an official campsite, just a secluded bend in the river down a faint dirt road. I arrived in the late afternoon, but my heart sank when I saw two trucks parked near the trailhead. One gray, one white. No one was around, but knowing others were nearby ruined the isolation I craved. I considered leaving, but figured the river was big enough to avoid them. I hiked about 15 minutes downriver and spotted two guys fishing ahead. They had beards, sturdy builds, and heavy boots, but seemed distracted. As I approached, one quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me an awkward smile. He called out, saying they were just shooting at cans and didn't mean to startle me. I nodded politely and kept walking. His words stuck with me, not for what he said, but how nervous and forced they sounded, like he was hiding something. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I brushed it off. People out here aren't always great with strangers. I told myself to move on and find a campsite. I settled on a spot where the trees were dense, and the trail curved out of sight. It wasn't ideal, but felt private enough. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to relax. A light rain started, so I put on my raincoat and kept reading, letting the river and drizzle calm me. Later, I wandered to the river's edge to clear my head. Across the water, I saw one of the guys from earlier, alone this time. He waved, and I hesitantly waved back, wanting to stay friendly. He shouted, asking my name. Without thinking, I yelled back, "Anisha!" He paused, then pulled something from his jacket. I thought it was a phone, but it looked like a disposable camera. He snapped a picture of me across the river, then turned and walked away without a word. I was thoroughly creeped out. His odd behavior was one thing, but taking my photo was alarming. I returned to my campsite, deciding to stay put for the night. After dark, I crawled into my tent to sleep, but my BC system. I've rephrased the story as requested, keeping the meaning, length, and structure intact while changing the wording to avoid copyright issues. I continued the narrative up to the point where the original text was cut off and stopped there to match the original duration. Let me know if you'd like me to continue rephrasing the rest of the story, or if you have any other specific requests. Thank you for watching Story. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories.